Hello, it's Lexi at Cozy Tea Cafe over on Bookstagram, and today I'm going to be summarizing The Fallen and the Kiss of Dusk by Carissa Broadbent, which is book 4, technically, in the Crowns of Nyaxia series, and it is book 2 in the Shadowborn Duology. So, if you're not familiar with these videos, they will be full of spoilers, full plot points from the beginning to the end, and there will also be some spoilers for the first 3 books. Obviously, we're on book 4 now, so there are bound to be spoilers. If you do not want spoilers, don't continue watching. So we start off in this book with a flashback of Asar as a little boy, and he's living alone on the shore and eating lost travelers to survive. Then the Shadowborn King, which we know is his father, sends his commander to bring him back as a potential heir. In the present day, Misha is in the underworld with Vincent, and he says that killing Atraxas extinguished the sun and is causing the underworld to crumble. Asar absorbed part of Alaris's godhood when Misha stopped the resurrection, but he's currently being imprisoned in the White Pantheon, and the two of them are the only ones who can save the world. Asar is brought before the 11 gods, and he steals a shard, attacks the White Pantheon sentinels, and escapes, but then he follows Misha's voice and sees it's just a trap. Asar wakes up and sees Acacia, the goddess of fate, with 3 demigods, and she offers him 2 choices. He can sever his bond with Misha and keep a portion of Alaris's power to become king of the Shadowborn and save the underworld, but he'll have to let Misha die. Or his second option is she can pull the thread of their bond tighter, and he can claim Alaris's full power by finding his 3 remnants of the mask, eye, and heart, and Misha will survive, but there will be a decades-long war that follows, and he'll never be king of the Shadowborn. Asar obviously chooses Misha, and Acacia warns that if they fail, the underworld will collapse and millions will die. While Misha and Vincent are traveling through the underworld, she feels the thread connecting her to Asar tighten. Misha loses Vincent after she reaches the place where the descent meets the mortal realm, and she sees it's decayed and then is attacked by a White Pantheon sentinel who are kind of dead, kind of alive. They have this strange armor that's fused to their bodies, but then a soul eater scares the sentinel off. Then she finds Lucy with Vincent, and he sends her off towards Asar and says he'll follow her in the underworld and will help when he can. Asar follows the thread to Misha, but the lioness and serpent guardians block his path, so he tears open the gate with his power. Misha destroys the veil on the other side as the underworld continues crumbling, and she finally sees Asar. We see a flashback of Asar's cruel training by his mentor Gideon after he took Asar to live with his father, and we see how he found and rescued Lucy. Back in Morthrin, Misha is fading because she's a wraith, so Asar feeds her his blood to help her adjust. Misha regains her senses and sees that Asar is now fading because contact with a wraith drains a life force, so she and Lucy get him to the magical bathtub from the last book to wash away her essence from him. When Asar recovers, they continue to the Shadowborn castle, and Misha is attacked by the guards, and they run into Elias. Misha sees Vincent while she's unconscious, and when she wakes up, she sees Asar and Ygritte, Asar's half-sister and new queen of the Shadowborn, and also Septimus, prince of the House of Blood. Misha notices that Ygritte and Asar both have air marks, and then Asar wakes up and tells Ygritte to get her hands off of his wife, which is news to Misha. Asar remembers Acacia saying he'll never rule the Shadowborn, so instead of challenging Ygritte, he offers her an alliance and asks for titles and pardons for both himself and Misha as his wife, and Ygritte agrees. When they're alone, Asar explains that the night of Malume is soon, and the boundary between past and present will thin enough to steal Mathesia's mask, which exists in the past. Asar tells Ygritte he wants to go to the Ravenhall archives to find a spell that will strengthen and protect their soldiers during the Malume. At Ravenhall, Misha can't enter the archives because she's dead and it's warded against the dead, and she meets Gideon while Asar is inside and learns that Asar grew up there. Gideon says the eye is actually an axe that Strana stabbed Alaris with, and it's hidden in the Deadlands, but no one knows where the heart is, Then he gives Misha maps to the palace so they can find the mask during the peak of the Malume. That night, Asar asks Gideon for the key to retrieve the mask, and Gideon refuses, so Asar tortures him with magic until he finds the combination of glyphs in his mind that are needed to open the tomb. Asar is struggling after torturing Gideon, and he has an intimate moment with Misha between a sheet because they still can't touch. When they're back at the Shadowborn castle, Misha sees Vincent in a mirror, and he says Alaris's blood is in the House of Night and can lead them to his heart, but Misha refuses to burden Rain and Araya. Asar will perform a spell with Ygritte during the Malume, and Misha will retrieve the mask alone. Septimus finds Misha before the Malume, and he apologizes for trying to overthrow the House of Night, but denies giving her up to Malik. He says Nyaxia is calling on the Bloodborne instead of the House of Night for her war, and says he has a contact who can get them into the Deadlands. Misha reads his mind to confirm he's telling the truth, so she agrees. At the Malume ball, Rain shows up and is shocked to see Misha alive. They're running out of time as Asar is called to perform the Malume spell, so she assures Rain that she's okay and says he shouldn't be there, then runs. Asar finishes the spell and goes to find Misha, but is cornered by Elias and Shadowborn soldiers who are there to arrest him after Gideon was found tortured. Then Asar kills the soldiers and also Elias. Misha reaches Vithesia's tomb and opens it by writing the glyphs on the door. Asar finds her and they see the mask beneath what looks like a pool, but is actually a gate to the underworld that's a veil between the past and present. They lift the veil and Misha grabs the mask, but a Soul Eater attacks. Misha throws the mask to Asar before the spell collapses and they're stranded on opposite sides of the gate. Asar puts on the mask despite Acacia's warning and commands the ghost of Alaris's Shark Guardian to retrieve Misha. The Guardian fights the Soul Eater and pulls Misha out, then Asar rips off the mask. They flee from the palace, but see that there's already a battle happening. Then a White Pantheon sentinel crashes through the window and says that they're there for Asar and Misha. The sentinels attack and Misha touches the remnants of Asar and Ygritte's spell on the Dusk gate and opens a door to hell, and wraiths pour into the room. Ygritte shows up and is furious over Elias's death because she loved him, and instead of fighting his sister, Asar escapes with Misha. Rain finds them and begs them to come back to the House of Night, but Misha uses her compulsion to make him leave for his own safety. Septimus then brings them to a boat that will take them to the House of Blood, and his contact will bring them to the Deadlands, but they have to agree to drink a sleeping tonic so they can't trace the route back to the House of Blood. In another flashback, Asar waits for his sentencing after trying to resurrect his lover, then is exiled to Morthrin, which is where he first started restoring it. In the present, Asar and Misha wake up at the House of Blood. Misha drinks from Asar, and they have another intimate moment. Septimus's cousin Atreus guides them to an old city, and they meet an heir-cousin named Selena, one of Acacia's human acolytes who willingly blinded herself to better see the threads of fate. Asar looks into her mind and confirms she isn't a prisoner and rules Glea alongside Atreus. Now, this is just a note that I did not read the book. I think it's called Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, that's in between the last book and this one, but I believe that story follows Atreus and Selena, so if you're interested in learning more about them, I think that's what that book follows. Anyway, the four of them reach the passage to the Deadlands and see that the keeper guarding the entrance was recently killed and could have only been killed by a god, presumably Nyaxia or Shaiket, to stop them from finding the eye. Since only the keeper can open the gate, Misha resurrects him, then Atreus challenges him so they can enter into the Deadlands. The keeper says even the monsters have fled from the Deadlands, then kills himself instead of challenging them. The Deadlands are eerily empty except for wraiths slipping through the growing cracks from the underworld, and they reach Alaris's execution site and see remnants of Nyaxia's destruction from her revenge on the White Pantheon during her grief. Asar and Misha help to guide a little wraith girl back to the underworld. Then they reach the Colosseum where Alaris died and sacrifice their horses to enter. When Asar touches the gate, he sees a vision of Alaris's execution. Then when he comes back, he sees Serana waiting in the center of the Colosseum with an army of half-machine creations that she's been keeping hidden from the White Pantheon. Asar notices Atreus sneaking Selena away before a white Pantheon sentinel arrives and attacks Misha, and they both fall into the forge as Asar attacks Srana. Misha fights the sentinel and sees Vincent and a wraith guiding her to Alaris's eye axe, so she grabs the axe and hears it speak to her as wraiths drag the sentinel away. Asar continues fighting Srana as she tries to convince him to join her. Then Misha climbs out of the forge, and when Asar takes the axe, Alaris's power takes over. Asar speaks as Alaris and threatens Srana for torturing Nyaxia. Then Misha snaps him out of it, and he sees she's badly injured and transports her to the House of Night. Misha wakes up and sees Rain and Araya, and Asar is being kept locked up until Misha tells them what's been going on. They're worried for her, but Misha won't tell them anything and just keeps asking for Asar. Araya brings Asar to Misha, and they realize they can hold hands without his life force draining away, and he thinks the mask brought her closer to life. Asar can hear voices of the remnants after he put the mask on to save Misha. Misha finally agrees to stay at the House of Night, and Rain and Araya tell Misha and Asar that they've had earthquakes and disfigured wraiths have been escaping the underworld through the cracks. They still have Alaris's blood and promise to help, and reveal that Vale's wife Lilith has been distilling the blood. Rain and Misha have a heart-to-heart and apologize for the secrets they've been keeping. Then Asar and Lilith start preparing glyphs in Vincent's old study to find the heart, and Araya opens up to Misha about her grief and mixed emotions over Vincent's death. Then monsters burst through the floor. Asar is distracted by the remnant voices until Lucy snaps him out of it. He and Rain see that the veil has cracked and a massive monster made of wraiths, soul eaters, and guardians is coming through, and the little wraith girl that Misha and Asar helped earlier is trapped within this monster. They seal the crack with glyphs, which traps her and the monster inside. Then they see that the underworld has collapsed and Sivernaj has split in two. Later, Misha gives Asar a cello after remembering he wanted one in the descent. Then they play together before sleeping together. Vale finally arrives with the god's blood, and Asar immediately realizes that Vale is actually an illusion, and it's really Gideon disguised as him. Gideon reveals he planted a hidden glyph in Asar's mind while Asar tortured him, which he's been using to track them, and he's lured the gods to them using Alaris's blood. Asar attacks him and Gideon crushes the vial. Then there's an explosion as Shaiket's followers attack the House of Night, and Misha is captured by the sentinel that's been following her. The sentinel brings Misha to a statue of Atraxis that's surrounded by humans and acolytes, and she realizes the attack on the House of Night was only a distraction, and she remembers Acacia's warning that Nyaxia would bring a great reckoning after Rain and Araya formed their Coriatus bond. Misha tries to warn them about Nyaxia, but no one believes her, and the Shadowborn illusion falls as the vampires attack. Sentinels attack the House of Night, and Rain sends Asar after Misha, and he puts on the mask and grabs the axe. During the chaos, Misha compels an acolyte named Kairini to free her, and they escape together until the ground collapses beneath them. Misha washes up on the beach with bodies everywhere, and the same sentinel attacks her, and she recognizes that it's her sister Seisha under the mask, which, if we remember from the last book, Misha accidentally killed Seisha immediately after she was turned into a vampire. Then an explosion throws her back into the water, and Asar arrives on the beach as wraiths crawl from the cracks of the underworld, and Ygritte attacks him with a god-touched weapon made from the descent poppies Elias took in the last book. Nyaxia appears and summons the mask and axe to her, and reveals that she ate Alaris's heart after he was murdered, which is why the vampires feed on blood. Asar offers to become her ally against the White Pantheon instead of destroying the world, and asks her to spare the humans in the House of Night in Alaris's honor. She agrees to let him ascend, but warns that the heart will permanently change him. Then Asar gives up his own heart and drops it into the underworld in exchange for Alaris's. Asar becomes the new god of death and kneels before Nyaxia, and she calls off the Shadowborn attack, but when Misha crawls towards him, he doesn't recognize her, and he leaves with Nyaxia. Misha is left behind and sees Lucy jump into the crack before the sentinel drags her down into the underworld. Misha sees Vincent and he tells her that when Asar became the god of death, it prevented the total collapse of the underworld, but it's still in ruins. Misha is grieving and tells Vincent to hand her over to Nyaxia, but he reminds her that she's the one who killed the god and also carries a piece of Alaris, which is what brought herself closer to life, not the mask. The dead choose Misha as their leader, and she develops a matching air mark when she grabs her sword. Vincent is pulled away and says he hopes Araya knows how much he loved her. Nyaxia and Asar go to Alaris' former home, and Nyaxia is disappointed Asar isn't truly Alaris. Shaikat and the White Pantheon arrive and threaten war, but eventually leave after Nyaxia reminds them that the god of death can raise an army of the dead, but Acacia quietly tells Asar there's still time before she leaves. Asar visits the underworld and brings a poppy back to life by touching it to the axe's eye. Then Misha later finds the poppy after he leaves and feels his presence. Nyaxia prepares for war, and Asar continues to feel drawn back to the underworld. Misha is guided to a ruined temple and places a metallic bird skull on her head, and it magically weaves itself into a crown around her head. In Morthrin, Misha is attacked by her sentinel sister again, and she realizes that Seisha has been following and attacking her because she believes a monster consumed the real Misha, and she's not out for revenge, which is what Misha originally thought. Misha apologizes for failing her and helps guide her sister's soul to the underworld. Misha comes across the library of Revenhall within Morthrin and sees a young Asar and Lucy, and he gives her the heart he dropped into the underworld, and then her and Lucy continue to the mortal world. Nyaxia orders Asar to raise the dead, but when he calls to the underworld, Misha appears wearing the bird skull. Asar attacks her until he briefly recognizes her and stops, and she begs him to come back to her. Asar tells Misha to take Alaris' heart and power, and she cuts his heart in two and puts half into herself, and puts Asar's mortal heart back into his chest and tells him to come back to her. Nyaxia scolds Asar for disobeying her and attacks Misha, but the dead protect her while Asar fights back. Then the White Pantheon arrives and Misha faints. Acacia says the House of Death and the House of Night both belong to her now after Asar and Misha and Rain and Araya pledged themselves to her. Shaikat refuses to accept this, and there are now 3 different sides to this looming war within the White Pantheon. Acacia tells Misha that she's weak because she's holding the identity of a mortal, a vampire, a wraith, and a god, but says in every fate where she and Asar meet, they change the world together. Misha wakes up and sees Vincent, and he says the underworld is stable again, and he's returning to the underworld for good. He gives her a letter for Araya and promises he'll answer if she ever calls upon the army of the dead. Back in Morthrin, Misha is fully alive, and she asks Asar if he intentionally left her the crown, eye, and heart so she could take the power, and he thinks he was trying to sacrifice himself for her subconsciously. Esme shows up and confirms she survived after her house in the underworld was attacked in the last book. They spend weeks repairing Morthrin and establishing the House of Death with the vampire cities that fall under their new borders, and they learn Gideon died in the battle. Ygritte has been sending dead guards across the border, but the bodies are unnaturally rotted. Rain, Araya, and the real Vale visit them, and Vale explains that he escaped after being captured by the Shadowborn. Then they all begin planning for the coming war between Nyaxia with the Bloodborn and Shadowborn, and the White Pantheon with the humans. Later, Misha gives Araya Vincent's letter, and she reads it alone. In the underworld, Misha sees Seisha's soul at peace, and she looks at Misha with love. Then Asar leads Misha to a Vithesian wedding ceremony, and they perform the ritual and are finally married. In the epilogue, Septimus and Ygritte pledge themselves to Nyaxia for the war, and she tells them to conquer the human worlds and kill the gods while they have the eternal night. 10 years later, it's still eternal night, and Septimus appears pained by the destruction of the human nations and seems to have his own hidden plans. So that is where book 4 ends. Again, this is the end of the Shadowborn Duology. The next book comes out, I believe, August 4th, and this will be the first book in the Bloodborne Duology. So we will be following Septimus and whatever he's doing 10 years in the future from where this book ended. So Thank you for watching, and as always, if there are any other books you would like me to summarize, just leave me a comment and I'll do my best.